Hello. This is
Hello.
live. This is Matt, and I am Bret, and we are the hosts of this show on the internet. So welcome. In case you didn't know, this is live every Thursday. We are normally here on Thursdays, like all year, every year for many years now. If you haven't been recently, Matt is now the co-host, and he's here in the flesh.
I have not been here for years.
You have not, but you were here last year. And we hung out in Florida, and the rest is history. So, welcome.
Yep.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Hey, we've got some announcements. So, this is a podcast. Did y'all know this is a podcast? I know we're just talking live on the internet, but this turns into a podcast. We want to show you. It's podcast.bretfisher.com. I wish I had a better domain name for that right now, but we don't. Something about buying a domain name called DevOps and Docker. I'm scared. I don't know why I'm scared, but buying a domain of Docker, like there used to be concerns about their name if you bought it. So we have this thing. It's all over the internet, and it's a podcast that comes from this live show. So in case you didn't want to watch this whole wonderful live stream with the demos that we're going to have and all that stuff, you can get it now in audio-only format. It's available in all the podcast players that I know of. There's thousands of those players. So if you don't find this in your favorite podcast player, let us know. We'll add it to this ever-growing list of the internet's way to listen to audio. We also have chat. You can hang out and chat. Of course, we're on YouTube chat now. You can all chat in the YouTube thing there, but we also have Discord. So we have a DevOps server with now over 14,000 people. We're actually now a discoverable public channel or server, so that's fun. Welcome to all the new people. I know we've got lots of new people there on the chat. What were you saying, Matt?
What does that mean? Discoverable?
In Discord, you can go and say, hey, let me go find other communities that I'm interested in. And we're now in that list. So you should be able to search DevOps. And look at that. We're at the top. I don't know if we're at the top because of luck, but we're right there. I need something more than a little background, but that's something. And there's some other cool ones in here too, actually. Some of these people we know. The Docker one, we definitely know of them. I don't know.
I saw there was that Christian Lempa, something like that. I watch his YouTube stuff.
I have seen some of his YouTube stuff. I don't know him personally, but he's got a good YouTube channel. I think there's a couple of other ones. Yeah, Raw Code. I was going to say we're missing someone else.
Okay.
Raw Code Academy's in there. I didn't know GitLab had one. So yeah, this is wonderful. This is what Slack doesn't have, right? Slack doesn't have the great community search and finding all of your favorite stuff. So we're over here. Come check us out. The little link is right above us. You can come hang out between shows, and you can even join us on a monthly. We have a special monthly hangout where we all just have like a lunch and learn. We learn from each other. We don't have any presentations, but we have this thing called the High Fivers Club. It's about $5 a month, and you get to join us once a month on a little. It's like a Zoom call, but it's funner because it's Discord, so it doesn't feel like work. And we just hang out. Matt's there sometimes. I'm there all the time. And what else we got? I have a course. Matt is not involved with this one, but I have a course coming up in July. It's my second cohort of my first live course. So you get to hang out with us in Zoom every other day. 20, 30 people, whoever's going to sign up for this. So enrollments are open right now. We've already got people that have enrolled, and you're learning GitHub Actions and Argo GitOps deployments with Argo CD. And you're learning all that within 2 weeks. It's going to be exciting. We did it earlier this year, and I had so much fun hanging out and meeting new people. That was really kind of the whole reason I did it. And you learn as fast as we know how to teach, and you essentially learn all the essentials in 2 weeks. So come check that out. That is on my website. I will throw a link here in chat just in case anybody.
Hopefully for the second time, you'll be a little bit less exhausted.
I did pull some all-nighters to get ready for that one, yes. I will get proper sleep for the second one, I hope. Yes, for sure. And then what else we got? Did you know we had merch for this show? I'm not wearing the merch today, but sadly I have no merch in front of me. I'm doing a horrible job. But we have shirts, we have mugs, we have all this other stuff. In case you're retro tech, you can get like a t-shirt with some high tops on them. I just watched the Nike movie. It was a fantastic movie, and I now want to have Air Jordan, like an Air Jordan.
Is it called like Air, right?
Yeah. Air Net or something. Air floppies. I'm not sure what that. We have to come up with something. Air DevOps. Dev Air. I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, there's a sale right now. You should check it out. There's a sale, 20% off. It's a pretty good deal. So yeah. That's it for us. We're going to bring in the guests now because we've made them wait long enough. So here in the middle, Michael Cade. Hello.
Hey, how's it going, Brett? How's it going, Matt?
Hi.
Glad to have you. All right. So for the last half an hour, because we haven't been streaming for half an hour, we have been furiously making Kubernetes clusters. Really, we're just watching Michael make Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah.
So tell us what. Yeah, you're at Veeam now. Talk about that for a minute. Like, what do you do there?
Yeah, so I've been at Veeam for 8 years, focusing around data protection, mobility of data, moving data. But generally speaking, our first line of conversation is the insurance policy for data. So backing up stuff and recovering stuff. But there's much more exciting stuff that we talk about, or what you can do with that data. But I've been here 8 years, like I say, and I started off being very focused around storage and infrastructure, around virtualization. And then more recently, I've been more focused around our Kubernetes backup and data management offerings around Kasten.
So in case you didn't know about Veeam, we're just going to mention that for a minute. So I look at Veeam as, and we were talking earlier, I learned about Veeam probably 15 years ago or more. It's a backup company. That's how I a backup and recovery company. I remember learning about them because they were one of the first companies to easily back up all the VMs on my virtualization platform instead of from inside the OS. Of course, nowadays that's how we always back up VMs, right? But back then that was a novel idea, was, hey, let's not put a backup agent in every server, in every VM. Let's put it on the host and back up everything from the host level. And so you've been there 8 years. That's pretty impressive in today's world of everyone hopping around to new jobs in tech. So you've got some history.
Yeah, exactly. And so before I joined, I was at Avnet and focused around NetApp storage, and that was and tinkering around with home labs, and that's what drew me to Veeam as well, in regards to like that community user, have a home lab, need to protect some stuff. Oh, Veeam have this free community edition. Let's try it out. Oh, it just works. That's kind of what I expect to happen with software, right? I just want it to work. And then when bad things happen, which they do generally all the time with home labs, I need to be able to recover things. So yeah, let's get it back. And that was just as easy as well. So that was kind of drawn towards their community presence as well, offering like free software is always nice, but there's always free like a puppy or actually free. And they have, well, they still have a strong community edition around all of their offerings. So yeah, that theme hasn't gone away, and that's probably why I'm still around. Is that ethos has not disappeared.
I do remember that. That was really before the hype cycle of open source began. I mean, granted, we had open source in the 2000s, but I do remember that I wouldn't be surprised that if my first time using it was a free edition, a community edition, when in the world where everything else in the enterprise was sales cycles, right? It was like, you couldn't download demos that worked. You had to buy something before you could try it. I never really considered that a trailblazing aspect of some of these companies, but now I'm realizing that's probably a theme of some of them. Is they were open source, or not open source, but they were giving it away free before open source was really such a thing, before we had GitHub.
Exactly, like a freemium edition. And the amount of feedback that we get through that community is incredible, that is then passed on to massive enterprise accounts that take advantage of that. And it's really, I would say, like the conversations that I have, and obviously that's changed over the last few years with the focus around Kubernetes and DevOps, but the feedback loop comes from the community, and that's still important for us. So yeah, very similar to the open source world.
Yeah. So fast forward,
looking at your background, the company name I'm most impressed with that you were at was the World of Computers. I mean, you worked at the World of Computers.
There was nowhere else to go, right? No. You've definitely gone back in time there. That was my first ever job, where I'm building servers for the University of Cambridge, and little did I know what they were even using them computers and servers for at that time, and getting some crazy kit delivered. I feel like I could have, if I could rewind time with what I know now, that would be a very exciting time.
All I can think about is Wizarding World, and how this could be like this is like the anthology of computers and books, is the world of books.
Yeah,
computing. I was going to say, so you fast forward a little bit, so 8 years, right? You didn't have Kubernetes backups, even though Kubernetes might have technically existed 8 years ago. Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah.
We weren't really heavy in the world of backups. I think, especially like when Docker and Kubernetes first began, it was like, hey, you don't back any of this up. This is all ephemeral, right? So at some point, we were talking before the show. At some point, Veeam was starting to think about how do we back up Kubernetes. You want to talk a little bit about how this all came to be and how Kasten showed up in the world?
Yeah. So Kasten was an acquisition to begin with, but I think you've got to go back to around 2017, 2018 when you start looking at stateful sets, and at the same time, Bret, and this is how we started talking in Tampa at an event as well around what do you do around like Docker volumes? Like how do we protect Docker volumes when you start to play around with that? Fast forward, Kubernetes becomes the predominant container orchestration engine. I'll say that, knowing my peers in the room, and we start seeing stateful sets, we start seeing persistent volume claims, we start seeing the database services release their software, and where there's a database, there needs to be some level of protection. Yes, there's that ephemeral world of stateless workloads, but where there's a database, there is definite state, and that probably needs protecting to some degree. It's probably important data. So we're starting to get requests internally from our customers about what are you doing around this, and we're constantly saying, well, we don't have a story about that. So we start investigating. I'm part of the office of the CTO, so we start to investigate companies and options that are out there. Going back to the open source mention around tooling around things like Valero that VMware picked up from a Heptio acquisition. We were looking at that, and what actually came around was Kasten, and we started looking into Kasten, and they have a very similar ethos to what Veeam does. They're very much agnostic to any Kubernetes distribution. Veeam were agnostic to any storage, complete software play. They had a community edition as well, where it was free worker nodes that they would offer as a target to get people to at least look at it. Again, if you're running Kubernetes at home, there's an option for that. And just a little bit further ahead when it comes to things like application consistency, and what I mean by that, and we'll probably get into that in a little bit more detail, is how do I coerce the workload? How do I coerce that database before we then take a backup of that or a snapshot of that and offload that? So that was another key area. So we started to look at that, and it was probably, I think it was maybe VeeamON 2019. So VeeamON is our yearly conference. We probably get about 1,500 people. We just had it last week. 1,500 people descended on Miami, which just so happened to be the one in 2019 as well, before that weird pandemic situation. And they were actually a partner at that event. They were an alliance partner. So we'd already started to begin that conversation. Fast forward October 2020, and we acquired them into the Veeam family, and here we are a couple of years on. And yeah, so the focus here is, again, always starts with that backup and restore. Get a copy of that data so that we can recover it if bad things happen. If even really bad things happen around disaster recovery, so fire, flood, and blood and ransomware. It doesn't really rhyme. Doesn't go with my fire, flood, and blood plus ransomware. But it's
maybe the blood is ransomware.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe we have to. Maybe people don't consider that. Okay, we've been hit with a ransomware attack or flood, or especially if it's a federal case at that point, they're probably going to. You might have everything up and running. You can restore all your data, great, but the Fed teams are going to want to see that. They're going to want to get into that source data center. So where disaster recovery kind of spans that line is, I need a copy of that so that business can keep working, because they might take over it for 7 days. So just things around disaster recovery isn't just a doom and gloom, a natural disaster type situation anymore, especially as we look at like cloud providers I would consider a disaster if my cloud provider goes down for anywhere up to half an hour to an hour. That would be a disaster for me. So how do we get that up to another cloud provider as quick as possible? And we could talk about that in the future. Where I get excited actually around what we do, and I kind of briefly touched on this around, it's the mobility of that data. Now, I specifically talk about the mobility of Kubernetes data, PVCs. How can I take it from one place to another, or look at the whole application? How can I recover that to a net new Kubernetes cluster, regardless of where it is? But that's kind of Veeam's story. That portability story has been VMs to physical, physical to VMs, VMs to cloud, and now we're talking Kubernetes, which by all accounts can be ran anywhere, and it might look a little bit different from here to there, but it's still Kubernetes. So the premise behind that is being able to move applications plus data to any location is kind of the very 40,000 foot view of Kasten K10 and what it does. And one of the things that you brought up, Bret, actually was, so Kasten is the company name, which is Kasten by Veeam. But the specific product focused at Kubernetes is Kasten K10. And we have a few open source projects that I'll try and touch on as well as we go through the session.
So should I refer to this as K10? Is that how you call it in the office, or?
Yeah, so K10's an easy way to just. So I know exactly what you're talking about. If you're talking about K10, you're talking about the application that is deployed within Kubernetes that helps you protect stuff.
Perfect. Yeah, because I want to know what all the cool kids call it. In fact, I wasn't when I was first. All these words on the internet. I don't know. You were saying that Kasten was a German word, I think, or something.
Yeah. I think it's German. Don't quote me on this. I don't speak German, but I think it's cabinet or wardrobe or something. Maybe if there's anyone listening, they can clarify that. But cabinet is where we store our stuff. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I think that was after the fact that it was named that. So,
well, it's as good as any. I mean, we don't even have to have a reason for names. But so K10. I mean, I'm an operator at heart. Like I started and spent the first 20 plus years in this industry, really very rarely ever getting paid, if any, getting paid for development. I was always an operator, sysadmin. And one of the things that I always felt like with backup products in particular was that the complexity and implementation and management, the level of complexity was inversely proportional to the likely success of it during a recovery. In other words, we would have very complicated products or things that we brought together through scripting and cobbled together different tools, especially when we were early days in Linux and we didn't have complete products, I would call it, rsynching with scripting and all this other stuff. And the likely success of us being able to use that in a recovery scenario was directly related to how easy that tool was to use. Because a lot of times the people that implement it aren't the people that end up using it to recover. And
and the real complicated ones are the ones that you're not going to try out to test and, rather than just relying on, the actual disaster to happen, but actually practice and try it out a few times ahead of time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to throw any products under the rug, but backup exec, I'm going to just say that. I remember this 20 years ago, right? It was a tool that seemed easy to use, but during recovery, we would always have problems. And it was such a frustrating scenario to think you were fine. And, this was probably pre-DevOps, so we weren't exactly destroying things on the fly and then just recreating them for the fun of it. It was always a very big deal to be able to do a mock recovery or some sort of simulated event, because we were usually we were early days virtualization. Things were still very physical in the data center. And I just remember a lot of battle wounds from dealing with recovery scenarios and being so nervous that our backup solution wasn't going to save us. And when we're going to do some demos today, right? So we're going to talk about some stuff. We're going to get into it. And one of the things that I know I'm motivated to learn, because I'm here learning too. Like it's great that you're here, Michael, because I'm dumb and I need you to educate me. But one of the things I'm really interested in is like talking more about recovery and more about some of the options and the methods for that than demo 101 is usually let's show how the backups work. And for me, it's always more about the recovery than it is
100%. And I think that, Brett, comes from the sysadmin background that you have and where you've probably been burnt by that, as you mentioned, right? Backup is, I didn't write the product. I don't write product. I'm not really I'm more of a hacker, if anything, when I try and make things. But backup is the easy part, right? We're lifting and shifting data from A to B. That's relatively easy. Now, how do we get that Jenga block of data back to where it was when bad things happen is the difficult part, especially at scale, at speed. And also when you think about recovery, it's like you're probably waving your arms around going, oh, other bad things are happening as well. Like, especially if it's an outsider coming in, a malicious activity, you've got other things to worry about there as well, like the safety of people. The data becomes like negligible at that point. So recovery just needs to be what I want when I need it and as fast as possible. So 100% is that. If I go like, and if we're specifically talking about Kubernetes from that recovery point of view, and also to touch on some of your points, Brett, is can we back up things natively within Kubernetes today with scripts and using native tool sets, especially with the introduction of like the CSI volume snapshots? 100%. We can write as many cron jobs as you want. We can script everything. But again, you're gonna hit that point where you're probably, especially as an application developer, you're going to be comfortable in the CLI. You're going to be comfortable maybe even getting your application. You know your application. When you throw that over the fence, or when it gets passed on or gets inherited from a data management point of view, a responsibility point of view, that sysadmin probably doesn't prefer an automated CLI or an API to interact with. They probably still, at this stage, as much as I'm seeing that trend and that go the other way, they probably still want that UI. They probably still want to hit the easy button. And I'm seeing both, so it's not exclusive at all. So from a Kasten K10 point of view, it had to be specifically available from both the CLI, i.e. CRDs. It has to be available from a kubectl type interaction, but it also has to have that easy to use UI, that kind of set and forget. But when I need to just hit that button and I need to get things back up and running.
Yeah, to me, one of the litmus tests is, can my most junior operator or anyone who would be in that role, can they do it, and can the boss do it? The person who didn't implement it, right? The person who's in charge, because it's going to happen when you're on vacation. When you take the holiday weekend and you're the expert in the backups. I've worked in teams where we had one backup expert. That was the person that was their entire job was to maintain backups. Obviously they're very tightly, usually, especially in data centers, they would be related to the operators and to the data engineers or the storage engineers, because they'd use a ton of the storage. They always need extra storage, more than you think, to store all these backups. And then the operators, and back when we used to actually have people sitting in data centers. I'm dating myself. I am a little gray. But people we would have an office in the data center, and there would be operators in there, and they had to be able to restore, because a lot of times we would not be able to get there. And I think nowadays, of course, everything's online. We don't necessarily have to go find a physical tape and move it into a physical tape machine. But that wasn't that long ago. Like those years haven't been gone that long. So I'm still very much in an attitude of like, there may be a few people that know how to design the backup jobs and to architect the solution, but there needs to be a lot more people that know how to recover. And there's like that break glass moment where you need the permissions to suddenly overwrite production with a restore that we all get into. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about some Kasten.
Yeah, so I can share my screen as well and keep me zooming in, Brett and Matt, so that you can. But to that point as well, Brett, like you'll be amazed the amount of enterprise customers in general that still need to offload backups from Kubernetes to tape. There's a use case and an answer to that from a Kasten K10 plus Veeam backup replication as well. But without getting into that, I like to think that is niche. But the amount of enterprises that we speak to, it probably would easily pay for my house if I could transact that myself.
Yeah.
But
So if anybody is in chat and they have tape needs, let us know. We'll make sure that Michael covers the tape scenario.
Tape for life, right? And I think just to go back again before I go into this is that over the past at least 3 years, we've seen that adoption of stateful workloads within Kubernetes much more than maybe we once saw. That argument around stateless versus stateful, I still hear it. Don't get me wrong. I'll go into a customer and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we're running this database," and you're like, "That database is definitely stateful. If you lose that data, what happens?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, that would be our HR system gone forever." They might want that, but yeah, there's an element of and if we think about Kubernetes in general, forget about K10. The last at least 6 releases over the last 2 years have had something to do with storage and had some sort of enablement for data in there. So that's another myth that we're constantly debunking from a community point of view, a data on Kubernetes type community point of view, because it's happening. And I think it's fair to say is that the more off-the-shelf software that comes as a stateful workload, so Microsoft SQL have released a container image for Microsoft SQL. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, but it's an option. And with the enhancements around operators within Kubernetes, it just really makes life a lot easier and simpler to run data services within Kubernetes. So that's kind of a level set, is that if it's a stateless cluster, you probably don't need K10. Although we have got some customers that are running complete stateless workloads that just want to protect their basically their manifests, even though they've got it in some sort of source control, some GitHub or Git based source control system. This will allow us, and I'll talk through what that looks like in the UI as well. But yeah, generally speaking, we're going to capture the whole application. So we're going to capture those manifests anyway that make up that whole application. But the most important part is the PVC, the data within that PVC. And then if it's a data service, how do we make that consistent as well? So before I get into, so K10 is deployed within your Kubernetes cluster. You see here that we have it. Oh, we have our own namespace here. So I like to say that we drink our own champagne. Some people would say that we eat our own dog food. But if I jump into this, you'll see that we have our microservices that are built up, our pods that we have. So we have our controller, we have our gateway, we have all of the things that enable us to go out to that Kubernetes cluster, discover the applications, feed that back into our UI or into our CRDs that I'll show you shortly, and execute on that, whether it's a policy that runs at midnight every night to protect our workload, etc. This is kind of, these expand as the cluster expands as well in a true cloud native fashion. So if I then also take a look at and bearing in mind, so I'm using Instruct here, great way of being able to demonstrate things and not rely on your own internet. Bearing in mind, I was clambering to get a cluster ready beforehand. I don't need the namespace, but let's just do a rep on maybe K10. Yeah, so you can see here that because we're deployed, so if you've got multiple Kubernetes clusters, you're going to have multiple deployments of K10. So you'll have a dashboard per cluster. We've got you covered there as well. We have a multi-cluster dashboard that allows you to manage all of those Kasten deployments across multiple clusters and also set global policies and profiles against that. I'll touch on what a policy is and what a profile is as well. But you can see here that everything that we have is part of that Kubernetes API as soon as we're deployed, because we become those custom resource definitions within the cluster. So we can start to dive into those at that point. So a simple Helm chart deployment. If I do this, you should see that we have our Helm chart deployment, and it's a Helm install K10. And the other thing that I'll mention now, so this is backed by an open source project of ours called Navigate, and that's NAVIG8, the number 8. And this is a visualizer for your Helm chart. So anyone that's got a Helm chart, and maybe their operator, their sysadmins have come to them and gone, I have no idea how you set these values, and you've got all of these values, which is quite a lot, because bearing in mind we're agnostic to everything. We obviously have an option for everything as well. This allows us to visualize that and then gives us a result, a spit out of what it needs to look at, so that you can then deploy that. So we're using it with install.kasten.io with our own Helm chart, but anyone can use Navigate as their own visualizer for their Helm chart as well. So got that in around that. So if I dive back to K10, so when K10's deployed, all of the pods are up and running. You get access to it either via load balancer, simple application within Kubernetes, exactly the same way, port forward if you wish. And what you're going to see is the first initial page, the first initial dashboard, is it's going to dynamically discover our applications. Now, applications equals namespaces, and you'll see here that I only have one. It's a MongoDB. You can see what it's made up of here as well. You can see that I have a volume. I have 2 volumes, 2 PVCs, 1 gig each. I have some workloads. I have a stateful set. I have some networking services that go along with that. And bearing in mind, this is just a simple, I imagine this is just used like the Bitnami Mongo chart. It's not an operator by any stretch. But you can imagine how complex this gets and how quickly complex this gets. So this is going to break down all of the manifests that you have, all of the artifacts that build up that application. We've got visibility of that. And this allows us to go and protect that if we wish. But we dynamically discover all of this. We haven't done anything at this point. So if I then go back to the homepage, we then have the concept of policies. Policies is where we can create I want to protect it, or I want to import it. I'll touch on import as well. But snapshot is basically, how do I take an initial snapshot and then export that out into a location. An import is when you want to recover it into a different Kubernetes cluster. Again, I'll try and cover that quickly as well. So if we look at this, we say we want a snapshot, we want to hit it hourly. When do you want it to happen? What's the retention look like? What if you want to enable backups to export out into S3? So here I have a disaster bucket already configured. I'll touch on that shortly as well. And then how do you want to select the application? So we could do that by name. So going back to those 2 dynamically discovered namespaces that we have within our cluster. We could also do that via labels if you had labels in your cluster, and then we can start to get quite granular about what resources do you want to actually include and exclude. So there might be secrets that I don't want you to store them, or config maps, irrelevant for us to store them. And you can get really granular about what you protect. We also have another open source. So I mentioned around the consistency. How do we get into MongoDB or Postgres or MySQL and start leveraging MySQL dump or PG dump to take an application consistent copy of that database and QoS it? Because if you think about a database, it's constantly being hammered for transactions. We come along and take a backup, and then it's a bit of a guesswork as to how we marry things up. By integrating into PG dump, we go, actually pause the IO a second, QoS the workload. Now we're going to take a copy. Now continue IO is kind of the premise to that. And that's not new for Kubernetes. This is a database thing for years gone by. And the way in which we... Sorry, go on, Brett.
Sorry, I was going to say real quick, it's a good point you made. We actually had a question on that from on Secute, like wondering how exactly the backups are done in the QSing in SQL, because that's something that you only learn about, I think, a lot of times as a beginning, ops person or developer or whatever. You learn about that when you try to restore a database and it doesn't mount because it wasn't QS properly and it's basically an incomplete file, or it has to do a recovery in it, and you see this little message that says we're scanning the database or whatever, we're replaying logs or something because you didn't properly QS it. So you're saying that like this is basically smart enough to recognize out of the gate, for example, Postgres, and it's able to just do all that for you, or do you have to like tell it what type of database you're doing, or
exactly that. You have to tell it which one you want. So what in fact, that's a good segue into another open source project that we have called Canister. In fact, let me dive into that because I'd much rather talk about the open source stuff that we have and how it solves problems away from the K10, the corporate commercial product, as much as that's important. So Canister can be used as a standalone way of taking those consistent application dumps, if you like. They're generally called dumps in the database world. And Canister can be used standalone. And we've got some people in the community using this with cron jobs. But I would say, like, we this open source project, but we heavily use that with inside K10. If you think about K10 as the orchestration engine from a backup perspective, Canister is a tool in which we use to bolt on to the scheduler, the orchestration of the backups. So so Canister is heavily used within K10, but it's a standalone separate project as well. Going back to the point about which databases or how do you do it, we have the concept of blueprints. And you can see here, long list. Let me zoom in. A long list of different databases. This one's interesting. Brett, try and remind me on that. I think that's an interesting talk track, especially between stateless and stateful. Right. So that is actually RDS. I'll touch on that later. But things like Cassandra, Cockroach, Couchbase, Mongo, MySQL, we know that there's 300 different types of databases. There's not one for everyone, but this is another reason for that community open sourceness is, well, people contribute and people bring the blueprint to them. So this gives us the ability to protect things like Elasticsearch, and this is what, in fact, let's take a look at one. That's probably a good idea. MySQL's a good one to look at. So if we look at this MySQL blueprint, which again becomes part of it's a YAML blueprint that we deploy, either part of Canister. Canister can be deployed via a Helm on its own, but also equally it's deployed as part of the K10 deployment. And you see here that we have a couple of different actions. We have a backup action, and this is what we're going to do. And this is specifically for Canister, but we're basically defining a few things like where we're gonna send the backup, where we're gonna send the dump, what is the database called, what is the pod called, what's this called, and then we're actually going to get into, okay, now that we know where it is, let's instruct MySQL dump to take that backup and send it to our temporary location. Sorry, I'm zoomed in, so I can't see it very well. But basically, it's an if this then that type scenario, and we have a backup action. If you go down, we have a restore action that does the opposite. We then have a delete action because you don't want these sticking around forever. Now, that's a very basic look at a blueprint. We leverage them within K10 as well. So hopefully that covers that. So we would choose that as part of that.
Is that I couldn't tell at the beginning of that blueprint. Is that blueprint an actual Kubernetes resource, or is that something specific to? Okay. Oh yeah, there you go.
So when again, if let me do this and do this, so when we install Canister as well, I don't believe Canister is installed on this cluster, but when we do, we get blueprints as a CRD in resource there as well.
Yeah, very cool.
But this is the K10. This is how we're using it. So yeah, that's another open source project that we're heavily involved in or maintaining. Where was I? Kasten. Okay, let's
So,
create that
real quick,
policy.
Maz had a question around, since we're talking about those backup policies. He asked if we have some incremental backups, or how does, I guess maybe more about that
That's
combined
a
with another
great point.
question is sort of like, is incremental still the way we still think of incremental? Like, is it still?
Yeah, so just for the benefit of everyone, what does incremental even mean? So on day one, regardless of if it's Kubernetes, VMware, next gen data, whatever the next big thing is, unless we decide that we are going to be magicians, the first day we have to take a full backup. So we're going to take a full copy of everything and we're going to store it in a location. What incremental, or the proper term for incremental would be, is what's changed since day one or first backup. We only want to take that. And that, to be able to do that, we either walk the whole file system and understand what's changed since the last backup, or we implement or have something called change block tracking that enables us to only take the changes since the last backup. Kubernetes, so actually to go into that, there's a KEP-in at the moment around CBT, change block tracking. So at the moment, we don't have anything natively in Kubernetes, but we're working on that, and we're heavily involved with that planning and architecture from a Kasten point of view. But secondly, is that so we do have our own way of about understanding what's changed since the last backup as well. So yes, we do have the concept of incremental backup. So again, backup is easy. Backup might be that we take a full backup every day. Is that the most efficient way? Not if it's 700 terabytes of data. That's going to take you a very long time every single day.
Right.
But then you're only changing 5 gig. Okay, that's the easy part, right? So in answer to the question, yes, we have a level of change block tracking built in, but we can make that better as a Kubernetes community by bringing CBT to Kubernetes as well, and think about other areas that we could use that as well, not just backup.
Can you define CBT real quick?
Yeah, so CBT, change block tracking, so that understands what's changed since the last backup. So if you've got 100 gig is the full backup, we're going to take that. Change block tracking is during that, let's say that we're backing up at midnight every night, and we've written another 5 gig, or we've changed 5 gig of data to that 100 gig. So now we're at 105 gig. Change block tracking would alert us to understand that only 5 gig has been changed, so that it understands what blocks that are different to the ones before. So we only move those blocks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
At the block level.
Exactly. It's right down to the block level, so that it means that we're the most efficient we can possibly be at that point.
Right.
Without getting massively into the weeds, we've written our own data movers to lift and shift data in the most efficient possible way. And things like CBT is only going to enhance that, but it doesn't mean that the work that we've already put in, we'll just have multiple options to move data from A to B. Yeah.
Not to get too much into that, but I guess that means that you have to understand the storage as well in order to do the block level.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, that's probably a good time. So I've created this policy. So you can see here that I've got a snapshot. So I'm going to keep a local snapshot. Now, depending on what that Kubernetes distribution is, if that's a cloud-based, I'm just going to use EKS for an example, because so an EKS.
I have one quick question. Policies. When I think of policy, I usually think of this is something that's going to restrict a user from doing something. But here we're talking about a policy defining the backup job. Is that a common way of referring to that in like the backup world, or is that a Veeam thing? Or
No, this is a Kasten thing.
Okay.
And the same for snapshots and exports. I would rather that be snapshots and backups, but that's me, and I'm trying to influence that little steps. Policy, I would rather that be a backup job, because that would make more sense. Because this is the thing as well, which we probably won't get to, but we integrate into things like Nemata or Kyverno or OPA. That's where the policy. That's where I
Right.
policies, right? And we integrate there, so we can have a policy that dictates that we need a policy to back up our stuff. And you're like, policies for policies, yeah. So,
Yeah.
but
That is a
well,
common
thank you
industry
for
term,
being-
though. That is an industry term.
It
Backup
is.
policy
It
is a
is.
thing. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
backup,
It
like
is.
when I have a backup policy, that is the overarching. Like there's many jobs within a policy, at least in my point of view. Like you might have a specific backup job that ran last night at midnight, but that was a part of a policy that overarches, all the types of data. And that's what I love. The advanced enterprise stuff. You can't make a job for every backup
No.
location. Like if you have 100 databases and 500 replicas of that database or whatever, like you can't really make a job for each one. You need a policy that goes out and finds all those things, does it holistically. Yeah. Otherwise, someone's job is all day is to rinse and repeat backup job after backup job after backup job. So yeah.
Exactly. And then if you think about like the nature of Kubernetes as well, things go, things come, things go, things grow,
Yeah.
all of the things. Now that dynamicness, like I've been pretty stringent on, like I want to protect everything that happens in the MongoDB namespace. But I could, in theory, I could come in here and say, okay, and especially at the global, if you've got, let's say you've got 10 Kubernetes clusters, you've got 10 K10 deployments in all of them, and we're on day 0. We haven't deployed any applications yet, but we know that we are going to deploy stuff that has MySQL in. We could do that via labels, and we could say, right, dynamically just grab everything that has the label MySQL, and then the app teams know that anything that they deploy with MySQL has to have that label on, and we dynamically pick that up. And it was kind of I remember seeing this in the virtualization space around VMware and storage policy-based management and vSphere tagging that never really or hasn't really ever grown. I've asked that. I've been to the last like 10 VM Worlds or VMware Explorers, and I always ask who's using vSphere tagging, because it's a way of being able to collate everything before it's even been created, like that dynamicness. But that really works here, is that we can create stuff on the fly that gets automatically discovered and protected without us having to go into each individual policy.
That's a big deal too, because 20 years ago, the process was during a project when you wanted to deploy a new database for a new application you're deploying in your data center, you would have to tell the backup engineer, hey, before we go live, create the backup policy for that, that thing we're about to create. Otherwise, it would never get discovered and you would never have protection. And it was like a checkoff on the checkoff list of going to production was, do we have the backup jobs in place and ideally tested? But nowadays, like that's an interesting point of view of like how things have changed so much, is that data is showing up in our clusters without really anyone's. It's not like we announce new data. Everyone at the company is aware we have a new database. Like, no, it just happens.
Yeah,
and then
yeah, exactly. No one's waving their arms going, this is new.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you have somebody's job like to check the servers every month to make sure that all the data is backed up, that's too late. Like you're already at risk. You need things that are dynamic. So as a part of these policies, you're saying that they're discovering things, like you said, based on labels, based on names, based on other aspects you might put into the cluster, and it's able to discover and start backing that stuff up automatically.
Yeah, and just on top of that as well, like let's say that you've got, well, generally like applications that are tiered from and I'm just going to use gold, silver, bronze as a tiering system. It doesn't have to be that. But what we could do as well is we can set defined policies that say, okay, gold needs to be on the hour every hour. Silver needs to be every day. Bronze needs to be once a week. We can set them policies as well, and we can get quite granular about what that needs. Especially, like I've got 2 applications here. Like I've never seen a customer with only 2 applications in their cluster, unless it's a defined cluster just for that one application, and that's a very different story at that point. K10 will come in and just protect that one thing. You probably don't need the presets, but that's just another area that we've enhanced that over the last couple of releases as well. Just on top of that, I see that this policy actually ran. That was quite, and it was successful as well, which is always good, because I did not do any testing of this. But you can see that the backup, which is the snapshot, and then the export, which pushed it out into our MinIO. And I'm not going to log into MinIO. Just trust me that it sent that data. You see this spec of that application, sent everything over to our object storage location. Good stuff.
So that's a good question, real quick, by the way. So you have your data. So you have your backup storage itself, and you're saying that that's an object store.
Yes. So in fact, let me just cover this last. So another thing we have, I will get to the location profile. I'll 100% touch on that. So usage and reports. This is what is going to the biggest thing for me over the last 10 years, 15 years of working with virtualization backup admins is what's your change rate, and everyone looks at you like you're speaking a different language. You don't know it. No one does. But what this does is actually give you that live storage and what that total capacity looks like. So even if this is, so it gives you insight into live storage, but also what you're storing in snapshots and backups in object storage. So, and it also then, so this is generated through, so every K10 deployment deploys Prometheus as well. You don't have to, you can point it to a federated Prometheus. I won't get into all of that, but we deploy our own Prometheus to get these metrics as well. We also deploy Grafana. Now, this isn't going to look very pretty because there's nothing really going on, but this is a K10 dashboard, and this is Grafana that's also deployed. And if we scroll down, you start to see, okay, my catalog is X amount of size, my job volume is this size. You start to see a little bit more information about how your backup infrastructure is also running, because you'd hate for your backup infrastructure to fall over if you need to recover something. So this is a good way of just having that up in a NUC type situation, just making sure that everything's green and not red like it is down here. Okay, location profiles. So under settings, we have the ability. So this is where we're going to send offsite. Forget about snapshots. Snapshots are great, but they're not a backup. They are a very fast recovery point, but you should always send some backup somewhere else. Like get it off that cluster, because a snapshot is going to be tied, not only tied to the cluster, but it's also tied to the namespace. You delete that namespace, bang, the volume snapshot goes away as well. And that volume snapshot that I'm talking about is created with us triggering the CSI volume snapshot as well. That's not us creating some spurious, our own like type. We're leveraging the native tool set in there as well. So options for profiles, where can we send those backups offsite? Amazon S3, Azure Storage, Google Cloud Storage, an NFS file store, any S3 compatible storage, as well as a Veeam repository. So these are the options where we talk about exports, this is that location profile. This is where we can store those. Another thing to add is that when we talk about sending it to S3 or S3 compatible, we can also take advantage of the object lock API, so immutability and versioning within your S3 bucket.
Right.
I've got a pretty cool demo on that, but not in this environment.
Is that kind of like a hint preview to the ransomware? Because that's important, right? We want our backup jobs to be immutable so that we can't. Yeah, they're not affected by that. Yeah.
Yeah, because and the demo that I run through is so I gain access to my environment, my Kubernetes environment, my infrastructure. I dive into my MySQL database, I encrypt that and take a copy of that, and then I dive into AWS and I destroy the bucket. Now, on the face of it in AWS S3, when you destroy a bucket or you destroy a folder within a bucket, it looks like you've destroyed it. Winner, you can take your hoodie and dark glasses off now and carry on walking down the street, successful. But actually with versioning, it's under the hood, but equally that database is still encrypted. So there's different attack surfaces when it comes to data as well. And we're seeing more and more databases actually become the source of an attack vector out there in the wild. Yeah, exactly. Just to run through these very quickly as well, because I'm not sure on time. Infrastructure profiles, this is just how so as much as I said K10 is agnostic, and we're the Switzerland. We don't care who we work with. We have a few bells and whistles with some. So the likes of AWS, Azure, and Google. This just allows us to start inheriting and start using like IAM controls that have been already set within the cloud provider. You'll also see Ceph and OpenStack and Portworx from a storage perspective. vSphere as a location profile. This is relatively new. This is part of the Veeam integration points that we have as well. So infrastructure profiles, if you're using them. Blueprints, this is where we can add our blueprints. Now, I would say that this is an MVP 0.5, because if I go in here as a new person, a sysadmin, and I go add blueprint, I've kind of got this IDE. It doesn't give me any hints and tips on how and what a blueprint needs to look like. And yes, I can copy and paste that from here, and I can push that into here. Great, but that doesn't really help me. I kind of want to know what I'm actually doing. So watch this space on that. We should enhance that. Let's not fix it. It works, but it needs some enhancements. But you can see here that we have that MongoDB blueprint. So you can see what that looks like. Looks similar, kind of. It's an if this then that type thing. What are you going to do? How are we going to coerce that Mongo database? Now, one thing that I haven't talked about, if you're going to go, like, let's say that all of our Kubernetes clusters are in AKS. Okay, AKS is very different to EKS. Yes, it's still Kubernetes, and some of it will be the same. But maybe, like, storage class is a prime example. Storage class example from AKS to EKS is very different. What this allows us to do is transform what that restore needs to look like. So let me explain it better in here. If I go into a restore of my application and I choose this one and I go apply transforms and I say add new transform and I say storage. Spell right. A resource. So I can change any resource, but in this instance, I just want to change my persistent volume claim. I want to, what do I want to do? Add an operation. I want to replace, and let me remember, pretty sure it's something like storage class name. I might be missing something out there, but ultimately I would then be able to go, okay, if I went from AWS, EKS, EBS storage, and I wanted to go to CSI, AKS, I would simply put in there. And that would, as part of the recovery process, make that change as part of the manifest. So it's not just data that we're thinking about, it's how we transform that data or that application as it comes through. There's a much better, there's an example on there, but this is where I start talking about things like application mobility. We're not really having the conversation about vendor lock-in, but people like to not be locked in. Like, as soon as you say, oh, you're massively locked in there, people like get scared about that. This is that easy button about being able to say, well, you don't have to be. Like, we can literally take any of the application that you have and we can move it from A to B, and we can transform any part of that application. Now, obviously, if you're in AKS or you're in EKS, they have their own like their own integrations. They have their own CRDs as well that they deploy within the cluster. So we can't manipulate that, or we can't implement AWS CRDs into AKS. We're not magicians on that front. But what we can do is, if there's an equivalent service, we can manipulate that as well. So this is literally, we can replace anything with anything here. You can see that the long list of testing and operating, and that kind of goes back to another point that was made around, okay, how do we test the backups and make sure that they're okay? Well, we could do that through transformation as well.
Yeah, that's a question we have actually from Moz. He says, does Kasten K10 provide any mechanism to test the validity of a backup before restoring it? In other words, how can I make sure that my backup will be restored successfully?
So yes, today, again, I would say a very light MVP. You have to do the heavy lifting here. You'd have to bring the test. Like, what do you actually want to test? How do you want to define what that looks like? So yes, we can do that, and we can restore to, like, if we just look at this, we don't have to restore back to the original location. We can create a new namespace and you can throw it in there. All good. We can do that. What I would like to see is an automated way of being able to tick against multiple aspects of the application to say this is good. Very similar to Veeam and Sure Backup, if anyone is aware of that. So Sure Backup is an automated way of verifying your backups, and it spins up the VM in an isolated environment. It tests against the app, it tests against the operating system, and it sends you a report to say, yep, that was all good. So the backup finishes, it then runs that test. You've got peace of mind, green ticks everywhere, good stuff. We don't have to worry about that, or at least we're not worrying about it when we come to recover. That's the important part there. So yes, there's ways in which we can do it. Can it be better from a field CTO technologist point of view? Always. Can you do it today? Yes.
And we didn't really maybe we covered it already, but this is capable of backing up more than just the data, the PVCs itself, right? Like, so is it able to back up the entire API so that if you need to restore that namespace, including all the resources in that namespace, you can do that?
Yeah, exactly that, and as well as cluster scope resources as well. So if you've got, let me think of an example of
like a backup policy, or a Kyverno policy, or something like that. That's cluster wide. Yeah,
exactly that. If there's a cluster wide resource, then we can protect that as well with a policy. But yes, so we're not just protecting the PVC; we're protecting everything. So this MongoDB one that I've got here is exported out into S3, actually using MinIO. It's protecting. It has a couple of snapshots. It has our spec, so it has our blueprint that we said. It has a config map, or it has config maps. It has namespace, secrets, service accounts, services, stateful sets, storage classes. So we can recover that application. That MongoDB, as simple as it is, we could lift that from this backup and we can restore it into another Kubernetes cluster somewhere.
Very cool. We have a couple other questions real quick while we're on the topic of Q&A. Maz also asking around, is the policy equivalent a task in the Kasten world? When earlier we were talking about backup policies, and is there a task definition?
Yeah, so we have so all of our everything that we do becomes an action. It's I don't see. So you have policies there, which is the definition of what the policy is. But when then policies run, they're actions within. And I'm not sure why it's not. Maybe it's just not under. Maybe Kasten is just not the right term. Maybe action sets. It's under canister. That's why. So, or maybe it's under that. Maybe it's under policies, but yes. So we can manipulate any of these. Let me try and find the Kasten-IO. You see that we have that test one there, but if we do a kubectl get run actions, you see that that's the execution model of us running that policy. So that ends in 2pz2. If we go over to here and we go to our dashboard and we look at our policy run, and you see how that relates there. If we go to this one and we go to view action, that's another thing we use. We leave I think they're called breadcrumbs around to let you understand or codify what you want to happen as well. So in terms of policies. We have a YAML for that policy, so you could take that, you could define multiple different policies without doing it click, 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 and you bring it into your environment. So you can see here that the run action name is over, the parent is run action. You can see that this is a backup action, and just all the information around where it's stored and all of that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Moz, let us know if that makes sense to you. I have a quick question. Since we're looking at a lot of the YAML there, is everything in Kasten able to become? Am I able to do basically a GitOps model, an infrastructure as code model, maybe for the entire product, where I can put it all in a repo and then deploy it to Kubernetes, and then the tool will pick it all up? Is that kind of the workflow? I mean, obviously we have the GUI, and you can change things in the GUI, but I'm just thinking, like, if you have, if we're very pro GitOpsy infrastructure as code here, so
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, how would I, if we did it my way, I would want to put it in a GitHub repo, a bunch of YAML for the policies, the configuration, all the blueprints, all that stuff you're talking about.
Yeah. So we could absolutely do that. I've also done a session on integrating backup into your GitOps pipeline, and that's specifically was using Argo CD. Mm-hmm. So Argo CD remains your GitOps interface, or the tool, the API. And every time you make a change in your application that does have data associated to it, whether it's MySQL, you name the data service, it will trigger a backup before any of the application is updated between version 1 and version 2 and so on. So I've done that session as well. And you could do the same from a restore point of view. And in fact, a use case there would be, think about like data scientists. They wanted multiple copies of their model and multiple copies of their data, or one copy of their data, but they want multiple copies of their model. They could use that GitOps model to define what that multiple copies of a backed up model would look like, how they would spin it up multiple times, and then at the end of the day, they bring it all down again, and so forth. So there's a potential different use case. It's not just backup and recovery when it comes to K10.
Yeah, we have one more question there from Moz. He's hammering all the good topics. What about security? We talked about a little bit about the read-only nature of the backup storage. What about security? Does Kasten provide any mechanism to make sure that the backup is not tampered with?
So we have several ways. So yes, in which we have integration into several different areas, whether it be from a secrets management point of view and rotation of keys with things like HashiCorp Vault and Amazon key management. Hang on.
Yeah.
Hold the line. Secrets manager from that point of view. And then from an authentication model to get into K10, again, I'll just go back to this, the bright lights of white. If I do authentication, this also allows us to, out of the box, we will enable this token-based authentication. That's really not going to be like, it's good for testing, but ultimately the token is a token that is stored as a Kubernetes secret. I'm going to let other people tell you about the downfalls of that, but good for lab environments and testing. But we do also integrate into OpenID and OIDC type providers, and that gives you a little bit more like MFA type authentication into your K10 dashboard, and your backups are then protected via using something like HashiCorp Vault. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah.
There's one other thing, Brett, actually. So if we see something out of the ordinary happening on our S3 bucket or in that backup repository, we'll alert that up here. We're going to say there's something not quite right happening. It's more of a flare going up versus we're going to do anything about it. I always talk about us being right at the bang. versus left of the bang. We're getting more towards where we have to do more left of bang, preventative versus remediation. But yeah, at the moment we're at the shooting up flare stage of something might not be quite right with that. So yeah, there's that.
In terms of backups, like whether or not the backup acted correctly, is that what you're?
No, this is
What's an
more
example?
about. Yeah, so the example there is, let's say we're backing up to Amazon S3. We're not using immutability on S3, but someone's added a new folder to an S3 bucket that is our backup repository. That'd be weird. So that would trigger an alarm into K10 and go, something's not quite right. There's an anomaly there that you should consider. It's only going to say, like, this doesn't look quite right. It might be completely innocent, but we're going to warn you anyway. Or it might be that someone's tried to delete all of the backup data out of it. Now, if you're not using immutability, then they might be able to. If IAM's not configured correctly and anyone can gain access to your S3 bucket, then they're going to be able to delete everything out of the bucket. And I think that's where the question was going. So at the moment, we're always suggesting use some sort of immutability on your backup repository because that will enforce it, but then also use best practices when it comes to that location profile. Make sure that only the bare minimum people have access to it.
Yeah. I was going to ask real quick before people jump off, how do we get started?
So it's a simple Helm chart deployment. So one, you need a Kubernetes cluster. But you see here that we've documented quite a few of the common Kubernetes clusters. For me, I would use either Kind or, especially at a home lab, but I'd also use Minikube. I've actually done something. If you search for little plug for a little project that I did, Michael Cade and Project Pace. This is actually a walkthrough on getting started with Minikube and Kasten K10 on top and a few data services. You see here there's a folder on Argo CD, so you can run through what that GitOps model looks like. That's the easy way to get started. But ultimately, it's just a Helm installation. Super easy. Helm install K10 or Helm add repo K10, and then off you go.
Seeing here on the website.
Cost?
Sorry, I was going to say. I saw the website.
Is there
a free version?
I say 5 nodes free. So
yes.
Once you go beyond the 5 nodes, then you need to start. Are you paying per node, or how's that?
You are, yes. So it's licensed on a per worker node basis. If I go down to licenses, so out of the box anyway, you're going to get a 500 node limit, and you're going to have, I think you get 30 days with that. Then you flip over to this 5 node limit, like freemium community edition, and it's based on worker nodes. So if you have a three node control plane, that's fine, but you can only have 5 worker nodes as to where you run your workloads. So we're not including the control plane in the license.
All right, so I show. I'm just going to send people to this to the free K10 download there. Kasten.io/free-Kubernetes. So you showed doc.
Docs.kasten.io is another area.
And what was that GitHub repo that you have as an example?
So this is Project Pace. Yeah. So this is, and the idea around this was, how can I quickly spin up an environment really on any machine anywhere? Minikube's great for that. And it also gives us CSI functionality, host path, but still gives us that functionality. And this is work in progress, but it will give you the ability to get started. Yeah. So like Helm repo.
Can you read off that URL for people on the podcast?
GitHub.com/michaelcade/project_pace.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to get a copy of that, put it in the show notes. All right. So what else? I know we're running short on time, but Anything else that we missed that's essential?
Just so I have this common question quite a lot. I don't know why I'm using all the Q's and C's there, but the final thing to mention would be not all data will reside in Kubernetes, and not everything will end up in Kubernetes, despite some people's say so. But like,
No matter how much we try to force it.
yeah, there you go. So let's say something like AWS RDS. Obviously, a great PaaS-based database service. You can also talk about Mongo Atlas. You can talk about Cloud SQL in Google. Name a PaaS database service. And maybe I am running a stateless workload within Kubernetes that is connecting to that database. But maybe there is some sort of config map that connects the two, and maybe there's some other different projected volumes that store a little bit of scraped data into my Kubernetes environment. Basically, what I'm getting at is, from a Canister and K10 perspective, we can also go outside of the Kubernetes cluster and protect that PaaS-based service. So I'm not sharing anymore, but in our documentation, if you go to extending K10 with Canister, on there we have Canister-enabled applications, and we can scroll down and you can see RDS PostgreSQL and RDS Aurora backup as well. I am sharing. Yeah. And what these do, these are blueprints that enable us to go and protect those. So you have a config map and a secret that allows you to authenticate into the database. Your application will have that already. We're going to leverage that secret and that config map to understand where that database is and where that data service is. And what we're going to do is we're going to go out and capture that plus the application in Kubernetes, and then we can move that wherever you need that to be. So if you wanted to get out of RDS and bring it into a stateful set, we could do that. But equally, if you're in a stateful set and you want to go to RDS, we can do that as well. So that it's that whole freedom of choice as to where you want to put that database. Or put a better way, the level of control that you want on that database. If you have that as a stateful set, then you're completely in control of it, which could be a good thing. If you're a DBA and you love that, great. If you're not, and you've inherited that database and you don't want the bells and whistles to turn the knobs and all of that good stuff, then RDS might be the best cost factor going. And I see a bit of everything. So yeah, that's it. Yeah. So that was really the kind of that was one thing that I remembered that I wanted to touch on as well, because I think when it comes to protection, no one is just going to have a Kubernetes cluster. They are going to have other services running somewhere else, and whether that is a database on a virtual machine, whether it's RDS, and that's where then blueprints really come in and shine, and they're very custom, because if you're running a virtual machine with Mongo on, for example, then you can write a blueprint that allows you to protect and snapshot that using EBS snapshots. Or it could, in theory, trigger Veeam backup for AWS that would allow you to protect that virtual machine as well in a consistent fashion.
Yeah, it reminds me of how, it's pretty rare nowadays to have one backup solution for everything: the data center, your clouds, multi-cloud, Kubernetes aware. The backup world has gotten complex. I remember a time where we were able to ArcServe, I believe, was the tool I was using way back in the day. I'm showing my age again. Back in the data center, and how we were able to really do pretty much everything, if not everything, in the data center. But as soon as we went cloud, and now everything's hybrid and multi-cloud and IoT and all this stuff, it gets to be a very complicated web of tooling. And it's good to see that you're thinking outside the cluster here. So that's good.
It was complicated enough, and all I had to deal with was a Vinca server to have my active passive NetWare server.
Active passive NetWare. That's a good time. NetWare 3.1. I'm trying to remember my last NetWare version in the 90s. All right, so this has been great. I know we could probably talk about this tool for 3 hours, right? Like we could turn this into a getting started guide, and I would love to sit on that call and learn how to actually implement a tool like this, because this feels very much in my, like it should be in my wheelhouse and I should know it. And I always talk about how backups and restores aren't sexy. Like they're just not naturally something that we all get excited about going to. But the fact that you have a conference, well, that's a good thing. Like at least there's a conference where people can go
and you
and
had
talk
a
about
conference, you said, in Miami. Now,
Yeah.
I grew up near Miami on a little island called Key Biscayne. So I know from my own personal experience that Miami's a horrible place. And if there's a conference, I'll go to the conference. But I have a feeling that some people think that Miami is a worthwhile place to visit and might actually want to be at a beach. So was having a conference there a good thing or a bad thing for attendance?
So basically, so we were in the Fontainebleau. It's happened already, and it's the second time we did it. So we were right on the beach as well. Numbers wise, if you think like Veeam is a backup company, going to your point, Bret, backup is boring. But I've been here 8 years. I kind of enjoy it. And 1,500 people turned up. Like I feel like that's a good number for a backup event.
Yeah, I should say it's boring for everyone except for the person whose responsibility it is to back up and restore. It is not boring for them. But for most other people, it's like putting air in your tires. It's like it's not something I'm excited about doing.
It's always bottom of the list, right? That's the problem. Yeah.
I had worked before for a company that made a fax server, so that was also pretty boring. So yeah,
there you go. Actually, you've just you've made backup seem pretty exciting again.
Yeah. The backup seminar for learning how to back up my fax server. That's the one that I'm going to take a nap in.
Oh yeah,
the first mission to go to.
Well, Michael, it's been great having you here. I don't know why we haven't had you on before, but we definitely will have you back when I don't know, K11 comes out. I'm making that up. Don't put that on.
Trademark that.
Yeah. But this is great, and I think this is one of those things where, like when we had Kyverno on, and some of these other tools where they kind of are a necessary. I'm not going to call it a necessary evil, but they're a necessary thing that we often all gloss over, right? When we're all talking about implementation, day one, DevOps kind of stuff, we typically skip over configuring backup policies. But I really am glad that we have some of these shows like this because I think it's kind of foundational, and we don't like to talk about it because DevSecOps nowadays is a more popular term, but we don't really have like what's the backup equivalent of that acronym? Like a dev back ops instead of backup, maybe it's dev back ops. We don't talk about that, right? And at least not as an industry as a whole, right? There's not a lot of exciting conversation around it when people show let me spin everything up in a Kubernetes cluster in one go. There's usually not a backup policy in there, and I'd love for us to change that mindset so that backups are just a part of everything that we do. And putting it as a resource is also exciting to me because I can put it right next to my application deployment resources. I can put in the policy resources for backup. So this has been good for me. I'm glad to learn about another backup option.
You think it's not talked about? I actually think of, maybe not the word backup, but disaster recovery. I do think of, and it's kind of what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you go to a conference, right? Like let's go to CIVO Navigate. How many of those sessions were about restores?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We love talking about the new and exciting, but the reality is every single deployment of a new tool, of a new type of architecture, of a new NoSQL database, whatever, there's a backup and restore component to that we don't really cover a lot of times. And it's a habit in the industry for us to not talk about ops, backups, or security. Security, I feel like we're starting to fix. We're starting to make it cool to talk about security, or like it's necessary and you're not cool if you don't talk about it. Whereas 10 years ago, it was definitely not as prominent. I'm not sure that restore and DR is at that level of prominence yet. That's all I'm saying, is that we could do better, but we're doing that right now. So we're fixing that problem.
Exactly. And my biggest thing is like I don't care whether you use Kasten K10 or not. I don't have a number associated to me, but just consider that database. So that's one thing we saw at KubeCon, right? In Amsterdam. Show floor was full of database or data services, database, data protection everywhere. There's open source options, Canister for one, to be able to orchestrate that backup in a consistent way, and just think about that 3-2-1 rule. It's going to take, generally, I always say that backup is never top of anyone's list until they lose some data. And then it starts to become top of mind for that person every single time. Which it shouldn't. With shows like this allows us to raise awareness of data protection, data management before the fact. The fact that I work there doesn't mean you have to use it at all. Hopefully that wasn't pitchy at all. But yeah, that it's really raising awareness of, if you've got data, if it's important, protect it.
Yeah. I think that should be the last word. That's a great motivational poster. I think we should, for backups. And I'm excited to give this a shot on some of my demo clusters. So I'm not in charge of anyone's real production. I purposely designed my consulting like that, so you don't call me at midnight. So I don't have anything in production, but I'm excited to talk to this about with some of my customers and clients. How can people? So you're on Twitter. We didn't talk about that. People can reach out to you on Twitter. I think it's like Michael Cade 1 or something.
Yeah, at Michael Cade 1. Yeah, that's generally where I've taken it everywhere, because I can't have it at Michael Cade. But that's another story for another time.
Who is the other Michael Cade?
Well, the other Michael Cade is a guy an actor. Yeah, he's an actor from California Dreams. Sly from California Dreams. I asked him many years ago if I could have the Twitter handle. He wasn't so polite in his response. Now I have more followers than him, so there's
sick burn. Well, so yeah, you can find you on GitHub and on Twitter. We know that. The links will all be in the show notes for anyone who wants to check out the tool, get the free copy of the 5-node option, and go try some stuff out. Go learn some stuff on backups and restores. So thanks again, Michael and Matt. Thanks you both for being here. We will be live next week. In fact, I need to tell everyone who we're going to have on the show soon, because I've not been great at that recently. But future shows. So next week, we're going to have a course Q&A. So everyone's off but me next week. It's just me sitting there talking about all the courses, answering all your questions about courses. After that, we're going to have 2 weeks from now, June 15th, Brendan Burns from Microsoft, who's one of the co-founders of the Kubernetes project. That's going to be a big one for us. We're going to talk about future of containers. I have 1,000 topics already listed. I'm pretty sure we're not going to get through them all, but come back. That's 2 weeks from today. That's June 15th. Also, after that, we've got the founder CEO of Solo.io coming on. We've got the co-founder of Ufizzy talking about preview environments. We've got Dan from CodeFresh coming on. The whole summer's packed. So come back on Thursdays to join us. Michael sadly will not be here, but we will be thinking about backups and restores the entire time. Trust me. We're definitely going to think about that. So thanks again, everyone. And this will be out in a podcast like in a month. We'll see you next week. Ciao.
Yeah, and yes, we do have to have glasses and a beard.
Yeah, yes, to be on this show.
Very good.
Well, thanks, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.